Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to My Favorite Mistake. I'm Mark Graven. Our guest today is Kim Sorrelle. She is joining me from my original home state of Michigan, different side of the state from where I grew up. But Kim is the director of a humanitarian organization. She's a popular speaker, and she's the author of two books. Her first, titled Cry Until You Laugh, was about her and her husband's battle with cancer after they were diagnosed 4 months apart. Her second book is titled Love Is. It chronicles her year-long quest to figure out the true meaning of love. And hope people will check out that book. It talks about her journey, including some life-changing discoveries she found in Haiti. So with that, Kim, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. How are you today?
I am doing well. I'm glad you're here. There's a lot we can talk about here about your book and your work and things you've learned along the way. But I guess one of those things you've learned along the way is lessons from a mistake. So I'll jump in and ask you, what's your favorite mistake?
Well, my favorite mistake was a very hard lesson, I have to say. I bought a grocery store on St. Croix on the Virgin Islands, and I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, so needed a manager down there. And put an ad in the paper. So it was that long ago that's how you found somebody. It was an ad in the actual newspaper, printed newspaper. And got some response, but got a response from one guy who was just felt called. Like he felt like God showed him that particular listing and he just knew it was the job for him. He just knew it. And so with that amount of passion and him really believing he was called to do this, I hired him. And it ended up being a disaster.
Mm.
Was not good at the job. He was not equipped for the job. Really, it was my mistake putting the wrong person in the wrong position, in the wrong position on the bus, as they say,
Yeah.
right? And it didn't work out. We moved him and his family over there. We had to move him and his family back. It cost a lot of money. Cost money because the store didn't do well, just all of that. And I learned that because I'm in the for-profit and the not-for-profit world, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I've had lots of businesses, and the two seem to do things differently.
Mm.
A mistake that the nonprofit world does that I did is hire fast and fire slow.
Mm-hmm.
When really you should hire slow and fire fast.
Right.
So take the time, make sure that it's the right person, and then when it's time to let somebody go, you gotta cut the strings.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And there's some elements of the story I'd love to dig into a little bit. You were new to that type of business, or I'm just curious. Like you were in Michigan, how do you end up buying a business in St. Croix, let alone a grocery store? I'm curious how that came to be.
Well, there was a listing in the Wall Street Journal for this grocery store for sale, so went down and checked it out, and bought it for the cost of the inventory.
Hmm.
So figured I couldn't go wrong
Mm-hmm.
because the price was right, and thought it'd be fun
Mm-hmm.
to, business is business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're running a golf course or you're running an event facility, a factory, whatever you're running, a grocery store, same principles apply. So if you can run a business, I figured I can run a business in
Mm-hmm.
St. Croix. We can make that happen. And it did end up being a great thing when we got
Mm-hmm.
the right manager there.
Okay.
But that's how we got it to begin with.
Yeah. And that was part of your background I didn't mention in introductions. Tell the audience a little bit about, before we get back into the St. Croix story and what you learned, a long history with the country club.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well, my first foray into business, I was 18 years old and bought an old building and leased space, and then bought more buildings and leased space. But bought this piece of property that was a 9-hole golf course with a shack on a hill, and turned it into an 18-hole course, and added fine dining and added event facilities, bought another place with event facilities, had other businesses throughout the years, and
Yeah.
lots
So
of fun stuff.
So it sounds like you have a track record there, or a real interest in building a business or taking something that was making it better. Like this grocery store being for sale at a price where it's inventory only. Like was it sort of a distressed situation that you saw? Was a turnaround opportunity?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The things weren't really being run run well in the business at all.
Mhm.
There weren't inventories even kept.
Yeah.
So we had to kind of go in and figure it out. But yes, no training of staff. It was a failing business. So
Yeah.
always fun to go in
Yeah.
and turn a business like that around.
Yeah. But I'm sure with your background in hospitality and customer service, that there was certain opportunity to do some customer service training to create a better environment for customers.
Yeah, I would say absolutely that's true. And the location of the store was more where tourists would go.
Hmm.
And it was just a regular grocery store. So we added a little bakery. We had fresh baked goods all the time, and nice cheeses and meats and things that tourists would like to buy.
Yeah. And so then you hired the manager. You talk about this idea of hire slow, fire fast. But if you hired fast and you fire slow, was the mistake slow to appear, or did you almost realize like almost right away of like some hirer's remorse of like, oh God, or did it take some time to really kind of understand that, okay, we made a hiring mistake?
It took a little bit of time because I'm, far removed from it, but getting regular reports and whatever, it all sounded good, sounded like things were going good until I went down and looked at the books and realized that things were not going good.
Hmm.
And there were little cues throughout the way,
Hmm.
things that were said that I thought, oh, you shouldn't really feel like that. That's not really the right way to look at
Like,
things.
what
And
can you remember an example of
yeah,
of
well, I
that?
remember, I remember him talking about somebody on staff,
Uh,
and the way he was talking about them was sort of dehumanizing.
mm,
I thought, no, we never treat people that way.
mhm.
That's so inappropriate.
So we'll come back to the topic and the theme of your book, Love Is. It seems like in a professional platonic way, he didn't love his employees or wasn't treating them respectfully.
Right. Absolutely. He thought that he was better than, higher
Mm,
than because of his position.
mhm. So then, kind of along that line of firing slowly, if you will. I mean, were you trying to coach him up? Or was this balance of like, okay, do I fire this person and try again, or can I coach him up? Was there some thought process around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there was this investment, right? I mean, it's not cheap to move a family to St. Croix, find them a
Right.
place to live, a vehicle, all of that stuff. So I had this investment and thought, well, gosh, if you can make the investment work, that's
Mm,
really the best way instead of having to start all over again. And I did end up keeping him way too long because I was trying to coach him up. And some people, you can be a great guy, you can be an awesome person,
mhm.
but it doesn't mean that you fit into every position, that
Sure,
every job is for you.
sure, sure.
So, something that I learned is that firing somebody, letting somebody go can be a blessing to them.
Hmm.
Because when people are not in the right position, it can be frustrating
Right.
and agonizing to go to work. And instead of living in their gifts and their passions and what they really want to do.
Yeah.
So it's okay to release people when you need to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that experience gave you a list of experiences or traits to look for to hire the replacement. Like, I'm
Yes.
curious. Then tell us about then the next manager and sort of how you adjusted based on what you learned.
Yeah. Well, we hired a man from a small island down in the Caribbean. So already it was a better fit because culturally things are different. I mean, it's the U.S. Virgin Islands, but St. Croix has its own culture. The U.S. Virgin Islands have their own culture. And so culturally, he was much closer than this guy from Grand Rapids, Michigan, whatever. So he had some
Oh.
understanding going in.
Hmm.
So that was good.
Mhm.
And really checked his credentials, really checked him out, um, but gave him some scenarios, brought him into the place, saw how we actually operated. Like we really took our time and found the best manager we could have found.
So, okay, yeah, I should have asked where that first manager came from, because I was making the mistake of assuming that you had hired somebody local or from another part, nearby. You talked about the relocation. I guess I wasn't picturing in my head a relocation from Michigan down to St. Croix.
Yeah, that's a long relocation.
Yeah, a big change. So I guess there was a lesson learned in having somebody who knew more of the local culture, because the store employees were local. That seemed like an important part of a manager employee dynamic there, of not being a total outsider.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's good that there's different cultures in the world, right? Like it makes the world more colorful and wonderful, but respecting the culture
Yeah.
and realizing that maybe you got to tweak the way you do business a little bit because you're in a different place, and it makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. So you've worked in many countries, different continents. Tell us a little bit before we talk about the book again. Love Is by Kim Sorrelle. Tell us a little bit though about the nonprofit work that you've done.
Yeah, so I run a nonprofit organization, Rays of Hope International. We're a humanitarian organization. We're a partnering organization. So we work with people in their own country that have a passion, a vision, a mission to do something to help people in their own country. So they understand the culture, they understand the language, and they understand the real need. So instead of me going in saying, "Oh my gosh, you guys look hungry, let's build a farm," maybe a farm isn't the first step for them. And so we just walk alongside. So, somebody knows that there's a need for a school. Well, it's hard to have a school without a building, without desks, without pencils. And so to get the supplies and get things off the ground. And a lot of times it's also with a business plan that leads to self-sustainability. So they're not always chasing dollars, but they're able to get to a point within 5 years is always our goal, where they're completely self-sustainable.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, thank you for doing that. And is there a website where people can learn more about the nonprofit?
Yes, it's raysofhopeinternational.org.
Rays of Hope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I hope people will check that out. And, just, maybe it's just a quick point, or I don't know if you have stories around this. So I've had two guests previously who shared favorite mistake stories about going into other countries and different other continents, kind of going in with an assumption of what they thought aid should look like, only to then learn, okay, that was an American perspective, an American assumption. Gosh, it's early. It's too early in the morning. I'm having a brain cramp. But the one story was about, going and building a school. And some of the locals were trying to warn her, the building's too nice. We don't need a school that's that nice. And sure enough, the school got seized by the military for their purposes. And so anyway, it's just I'll look up the names and maybe put links in the show notes for those related episodes. But I mean, have you managed to avoid mistakes of kind of like cultural assumptions of coming into a different land?
No, I've not managed to avoid mistakes.
That's okay. But yeah.
I wish I could say that I have, but I've had some very interesting experiences that, looking back, maybe I would have handled differently. But also realizing that people are people all over the world, and being a woman dealing with some countries that are just completely run by men can be a difficult thing. But I don't think about my gender until somebody points it out to me, right? So, I just feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And then when all the doors are closing and wondering why, you learn, I learned in a hurry how to deal with that, how to work through that. And I had a situation in Venezuela. I went there after horrible flooding that killed, I think, 60,000 people. It was terrible. And
gosh.
I wanted to send down some medicines for the refugees that were in refugee centers. And, one person gets sick, they all get sick, and thousands of people that had lost their homes, and talked to doctors there to find out what they needed. And I was not comfortable working with the docs. I went to the doc to, okay, who's your boss? Who's your boss? Trying to get to the top of the food chain to figure out who I could talk to make sure things weren't stolen on the dock.
Right.
And I was getting nowhere. It was so frustrating. I finally drove to the presidential palace.
Oh gosh.
I said, I'm here to see the president. And they got on the phone and
You're
said
like,
a couple of things and
yeah.
waved me in to go park. And I went inside and they said, and I said, I'm Kim Sorrelle. I'm here to see the president. And they made a phone call and had me sit down. And then they walked me up some stairs and there was Hugo Chavez, President Hugo
Oh my
Chavez,
gosh.
in a press conference. And so we waited for the press conference to be done and ushered into an office. And then I talked to him and told him what I had going. And he guaranteed that everything would get through on the docks, that nothing would get stolen. And that's what happened.
Wow. Okay. So I'm glad I asked the question. The that took an unexpected turn. And
Yeah.
you had me wondering which country, and okay. Well, gosh. So that could have been a mistake to just show up unannounced saying, I need to
Yeah,
talk to the
especially, yeah. I mean, they have big guns. So yeah, it certainly
well,
could have been a mistake.
but I mean, at the same time, I mean, I don't know. Did it help being a woman that they didn't think that you were a revolutionary coming to overthrow him? I mean, there must have been some security checks though.
You would think that there'd be more than what there were. I mean, they really
Right.
did. I had my 14-year-old son with me and they just let us in. I mean, it was I don't know why. I don't know how, but an answer to prayer or whatever. But yeah, it was, I think being a woman probably helped me in that
Uh-huh.
moment because I wasn't a threat.
Wow. 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 That's fascinating. I'm just curious. How, I mean, like how long, not to get too deep into this, but like, I mean, how long was that meeting or that interaction or, I mean, see, looking at you suspiciously as an American capitalist or.
Yeah, it was probably 45 minutes. I
Uh-huh.
was with him for quite some time and certainly had to build a rapport to begin
Mm,
with,
yeah.
to build a trust so that we could talk about the nuts and bolts of things.
Wow. And he did follow through on that commitment to make sure things got through.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, actually, I got phone calls from other nonprofits that were trying to send aid down, that their stuff had been sitting on the dock for a year. A year later, I got a phone call from one, and a year and a half later from another, and their stuff was still on the dock and not released. And it
Mhm.
cost money to sit on the dock, and
Right.
wondered if I could use my pull. And I said, I think that was probably a one-time deal for me.
Wow. Um, so now allow me to, I don't know, a smooth transition to talk about your book. Maybe you came in with a loving attitude and because you were doing work to help people and maybe that came through. But let's talk about your second book, Love Is. I mean, love is a word we know, right? But it generates so many, I don't know, songs, poems, movies. We love exploring the idea of love. Like what prompted you to write the book and to really dig into the meaning of love?
Well, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and then 4 months later, my husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he passed
Uh,
away 6 weeks after that.
oh gosh.
Yeah, it was a crazy time, and I was 47 years old and thought I had my life planned. We were going to grow old together, and all of a sudden, I was alone. And
Uh,
it's different being alone after all those years. And so I questioned some things, and the true meaning of love, what love really is one of the things I questioned. I wanted to make sure I was doing this life right and that I understood. And there does seem to be this mystery around love, like who's really done a deep dive into love. So I decided I would dedicate a year to figuring out the true meaning of love.
mhm.
So I took this 2,000-year-old poem that you hear at weddings: love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast, right? And decided I would take one word a month and figure out what is love that is patient, what is love that is kind.
Right.
And I got to tell you, Mark, I have a hard time committing to an entree when I go out to eat at a restaurant.
Mhm.
So committing a year to something was a big thing for me to do.
Yeah.
But the things I learned just blew my mind.
Right. I'm sorry. Yeah. Writing a book is almost like committing to eating the same dinner every night.
It's
You
true.
better like that meal. You better like that topic. And I mean, I think clearly you do. And I am and when you talk about love is patient, love is kind, that's actually biblical.
Right.
Corinthians. I'm not an expert on this.
Yeah.
Remind us
First Corinthians
some.
13.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yep.
and it's really powerful. And I oh gosh, I mean, this is 21 and a half years ago. Speaking of love, I'm trying. I'm trying to remember if that was read at my wedding. My wife and I at our wedding. I'm going to blame it being early in the morning and the coffee not kicking in, and she won't be too upset with me about that detail. But it's powerful. It's beautiful when you talk about, yeah, love is patient, love is kind. The full. I know you explore this in the book and the ebook guide that you have available. But what surprised you most then, in that year of study and learning and reflection? Like, what surprised you most about love?
Oh my gosh, there were so many surprises, and it was a crazy year. I was chased by a motorcycle gang. I got lost on a mile-high mountain with a med student in the dark. I slept outside with tarantulas and snakes and chupacabras or whatever is lurking in the bushes of Haiti. I mean,
Uh-huh.
crazy, crazy stuff happened. And so I learned so much the whole time. But love, I think, is so often thought of as a feeling or an emotion.
Hmm.
And it's not. If you watch a scary movie, that night you go to bed, you hear every creak, every bump, right? You're scared, something's going to jump out at you, but you get over it. You don't live in fear. Fear is an emotion. You don't live in fear, but
Mm-hmm.
you live in love.
Mm.
Love, you don't hang it up in the closet when you get home or when you get to the office. It is always with you. It's part of you. It's who you are.
Mm.
And then how you choose to live it is up to you. But love is everything everywhere. And
Yeah.
there seems to be this expectation, maybe even when you were in marriage counseling with your wife, you might have heard that love is, it's got to be 50-50, it's got to be 100-100, or that it's a two-way street or whatever. And
Hmm.
none of that is true. Love is 100% on you. If I give you money and you give me a pair of jeans, that's a transaction. And
Yeah.
love is not a transaction. Love is on you. You have no control over anybody but yourself.
Mm.
And so I think people get hurt so often because when they love, they have this expectation of getting the same love in return, but you
Mm.
have no control over what comes back. You have
Hmm.
no control.
Mm.
So when you do that, you set yourself up for heartache and disappointment and loneliness.
Hmm.
And love is not that. Love loves, period.
Mm.
Love loves everyone, and love just loves.
So the word unconditional comes to mind. Like love. If it's really love, it's unconditional, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's unconditional. Everybody is worthy of love.
Mhm.
Everybody is, including yourself.
Yeah.
So you got to love
Yeah.
yourself so you can love other people, but we're all worthy of love. You
Yeah.
don't have to like everybody. I think that gets a little messy when people
Yeah.
start to think about that. You don't have to like everybody, but loving everybody,
Mm.
just loving the uniqueness of everybody and everybody's differences, and showing that love, living in that love is the most freeing, peaceful way to live.
Oh, that's very nicely said. You use this phrase, you talk about loving ourselves, which leads into another a question I was going to ask. So if we go through the love is patient, love is kind, and it continues, as you highlight in the ebook, love keeps no record of wrongs. So that jumped out at me when we think of the theme here for my favorite mistake, the podcast, my book, the mistakes that make us. Of like finding a balance of like when we make a mistake, to be kind to ourselves, to love ourselves, however you want to put it, and like reflect and learn without shaming ourselves or making ourselves feel bad or dwelling on it. Like, what are your thoughts about sort of loving yourself when you make mistakes?
Yeah. It's interesting you've picked that one. I dreaded doing that month. I wanted to
Right.
put it off. I was thinking, what could that even mean? Because we might forgive people, we might forgive the things that happen to us, but you don't forget.
Hmm.
So, keeping record of wrongs, what does that mean? And And the reality is that, oh my gosh, and what I went through that month was crazy to finally get hit over the head with the truth of it. But we pick the tone. We pick the narrative. We
Mhm.
choose our own narrative, right? There
Mhm.
can be two people in the same traffic jam, and one guy is mad and his blood
Right.
pressure's going up and he's pounding on the steering wheel and he's honking his horn. And in the very next car, a guy's going, I'm in this traffic jam. There's nothing I can do. Mark's got this great podcast. I think I'll turn that on and just chill.
Yeah.
And so, the same situation with two different narratives, two
Mhm.
completely different narratives.
Mhm.
So
Mm.
we pick the narrative.
Mhm.
So with the stuff that happens to us that might make us go, oh my gosh, I was so dumb. I can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
Instead of that going, oh, well, what did I learn?
Yeah.
What did I learn from that? And how can I grow from that?
Yeah. No, that's great, and it makes me think of the late great Stephen Covey of the Seven Habits fame. I had an opportunity once. I'm very thankful for to do a brief interview with him, and I was there in person. It's one of the few times where I was actually like holding a recorder up to somebody, and he. I asked him a question about, like respecting people in the workplace, and what does that mean to you? And I'm quite certain he actually used the word love. That means you love, others. I'm paraphrasing, and I could link to the conversation, but that really struck me as being really powerful. And then when he taught a class, he was emphasizing, and I try to reminding myself of this, of putting a pause between stimulus and response is something humans should have the unique ability to do, maybe. But we sometimes struggle with that. And I think what you're saying makes me think of, like, putting in that pause. If somebody's being unkind to you, we have a choice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. That there's so much wisdom in that. And I'm thinking about how things in my own life would be different if I put in the pause more often. It's easy to, like as a couple, it can be so easy. You get in an argument over some stupid thing because usually they're over some stupid thing, right?
Mhm.
And so, you might start with a conversation that turns into more of a confrontation. And pretty soon, your blood pressure's rising and your mind's going crazy. And then you're going, and that thing that you did that last week, and then 2 years ago when you did this, and whatever, we bring up stuff from the past because we're at this heightened phase of our bodies, adrenaline's rushing, and all these things are happening to us.
And,
And if you can take a pause instead of
mhm.
going to that place,
Yeah,
things would be a lot different.
we can choose calm, we can choose kindness, we can choose love.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It is a
And
choice.
yeah, and so I want to ask you about how you apply what you've learned to the workplace, country club, other settings. Stephen Covey, I could be wrong, but I'm quite certain he used the word love. And I'll tell you, when I started my career in manufacturing, nobody went anywhere near that word love. In healthcare, people do more often use the word love in a platonic, we love our patients, we can be loving, and all of that. But like, what have you learned about choosing love or being loving toward employees, or what advice do you have for others if they're running a business like you do?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, one thing that love does is recognize is that everybody is this unique individual masterpiece, right? This one of a kind. Nobody ever like you before. Nobody ever will be like you again. You are the only you. You're the only one that has walked in your shoes.
Mm.
So everyone has a past. Everyone was raised in different homes. We all have stuff that we bring to today. All of our days that we've led so far lead us to today. And so to pause and take a moment when you're questioning why somebody responded a certain way, to realize, well, they responded that way because of who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And because not so much necessarily who they are, but what they know, what they've been taught and what they know. And so to give grace is
Mm-hmm.
loving.
Mm-hmm.
To question yourself first and say, what could I do differently?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what kind of training or what could I do
Mm-hmm.
differently to help this person on my staff?
Mm-hmm.
But respecting and recognizing that they have a family and they're an individual. And my dad was old school, 1960s Mad Men, or I don't know, kind of leadership,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
And he used to say, Kim, you got to swear at people sometimes. And
Yeah.
I'd say, Dad, if I ever have to swear at somebody, we shouldn't be working together, because
Yeah.
nobody should ever be disrespected like that. Things should not be so bad that you have to swear at somebody.
Yeah.
I think, love helps you keep that perspective that
Mm-hmm.
each individual, and grateful, my gosh, so grateful for the people
Yeah.
that would put in the time to work for me.
Yeah.
Just how nice.
Well, I'm sorry, what was that last part? I cut you off.
It's just so wonderful,
Yes.
the commitment and loyalty and
Mm-hmm.
friendships that develop.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, yeah. And I love the way you phrase it. Questioning yourself first. Like a lot of times leaders for different reasons, because someone's made a mistake or there are problems. It seems like the default, leaders will jump in to blame the person. And I've even seen, situations where people didn't reflect and learn the way you did with your grocery store. They will just keep hiring and firing and curse all those employees. Or why do I, without thinking like, okay, if the problem really is a series of crappy employees, like what role do you play in that? And I've had other guests share that reflection where it took a couple of mistakes before they realized, okay, I'm, as you put it, okay, it's time to question myself first instead of just pointing fingers at others. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, well, I think it's just so true. Anytime I've ever felt like I had to let somebody go, I would first think, I say anytime, like my whole life I did this. This is something I learned to do. But I would first think, did I train them right? Have I equipped them? Do they have the necessary tools that they need to really do the job? And then I'd question, are they in the right position? Is there a different position in the company that they should be in? Maybe that's not their skill set. Maybe that's just not where they should be. But the whole time recognizing that they're a person, they're a real person with a life, that I love this person and you want the best for them. And so if I believe that I have indeed trained them well, and if I believe that they really are not in the right position, and so they're not going to be happy there either, and get to a point where I have to cut the ties to make it not so painful, to let them realize that you see their value. It just doesn't happen to be in that position.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's a matter of fit. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
You're triggering one other memory, and this is a very vivid memory back to, forgive me, General Motors 1995 or so. Some visiting executive coming to the plant, and I can even picture the room and kind of picture the table that he sort of pounded on. But I'll clean it up. But the very direct quote was something like, you've got to bleeping swear at people, or they don't bleeping know that you're bleeping serious. I mean, it was like, okay. Like that's.
Was that my dad? I wonder if that was my dad.
I mean, that was not a healthy, good environment. But long story short, we got a new leader for that facility, and the attitude of a leader and the true respect that they have for employees, that makes such a huge difference.
It does. It does. I mean, you're at work a lot of hours in a week, right? You spend more time at work than you do with your spouse a lot of times, or certainly with your kids or with whoever. And so it's a big part of your life. And people deserve to be deserve isn't a word that I I throw around lightly. I'm
Right.
not fond of that word,
Yeah.
but people do deserve to be treated with respect at work.
Yeah. That's great. So before we wrap up here, our guest has been Kim Sorrelle. Her most recent book, again, is Love Is. Is there another topic that you've decided, whether it's a full year or not, to dive into and to research and think about and write something new?
Yeah, well, interesting question. Yes, I'm actually writing a book on grief right now.
Mm,
Grief is a place that we don't always give each other grace
mhm,
to grieve, and it's so individual. And there's this list of steps of grief that you're supposed to go through, and not everybody does. And
mhm,
sometimes you need permission to grieve and understand what grief is. And
mhm,
so I'm co-authoring with a friend of mine who's a medium.
mhm. Hmm.
So she has a different perspective on grief as well. So it's been fun. It's interesting. I think it'll be
Right. Well,
good.
I'm sure people can sign up for more information through your website. Again, our guest is Kim Sorrelle, kimsorrelle.com. I'll put a link in the show notes so you can get there. And then the final thing I want to offer and share, because I downloaded this, I took you up on the offer, Kim. You spent a year looking at love. You've set up maybe an easier, shorter challenge, a 14-day love challenge. There's an ebook that people can go and download. Just tell us about that real quickly, of why somebody should go and do that.
Well, I think there's such misunderstanding about love.
Mhm,
And when you really understand what love actually is and how to live it, it really is life changing for all the good reasons and all good ways. And so it's an easy challenge. It's just reading something about love every day, short and sweet,
mhm,
and then thinking about it that day and trying to live it out that day, see what that feels like. And so there are 14 is's and isn't of love in that chapter. And so it took me a little longer than a year, but so that's why it's a 14-day love challenge.
yeah.
And when you sign up for it, I will send you, if you sign up on my website for it, you can do it without signing up. You can do it either way.
Oh, okay.
If you do, I will send you a free WWLD, What Would Love Do
Mhm,
wristband.
yeah.
Because if you're going to answer any question
Mhm.
with What Would Love Do, you're going to be doing the right thing.
That's so perfectly said. That's a lovely note to end on. So again, our guest has been Kim Sorrelle. Most recent book, Love Is. Kim, I've loved having you here as a guest. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love your show. It should be on everybody's podcast list, and everybody in the world should listen to you. You have such wisdom, and I just so enjoy you and your show. Thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thanks so much.